Bismillah Rahman Rahim. So today we are on the third and the last part of the videos which are focusing on the Prophet of God, Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. But now, before we move on to the content of this video, I want us to stop and understand something. In the past few videos, we've been looking at and talking about the Prophet of God, his personality, his character. But in reality, to really understand this topic, it would take any human a lifetime. The Prophet's character, his personality, the wisdom behind each one of his words, the wisdom behind every one of his actions. What is his impact on the history of this world? You can spend your entire life studying and trying to understand all of this, and you would still only be scratching the surface. So point is that this and the last two videos are only meant to open a door in your mind, just so we can start thinking about this topic. Later on, if you want, we can come back to this topic and look at it in much more detail. But you see, on this channel, our goal is to explore the fundamentals and practical application of religion in our life. So we want to move on to this and to that topic very quickly. So up until now, we have seen what non-Muslim intellectuals think and say about the Prophet. We have also seen what people who actually met the Prophet and people who actually interacted with him said about him. Today, we want to look at what the Prophet's enemies said about him. But why do we want to do that? You see, it's important for us to look at this because the Prophet of God, the Messenger, is perhaps one of the biggest targets of character assassination in history. The things that have been said and written about him, honestly, we can't even repeat some of these things to you. And unfortunately, the world today sometimes judges him by that nonsense. But this brings us to another question. Why were such things written about him? To understand that, we have to look a bit deeper into the history of Islam. The historical sources we find today, you see, the ones that talk about the history of the religion, these are primarily records of the political history of Islam. And these political records were very often sponsored by governments and caliphates. Similar to the way that today we have, for example, organizations sponsoring science and research. So when these authorities were sponsoring and commissioning this Islamic history, they of course had their own agendas. And the most important agenda of any government, you will know, is its own legitimacy and continuation. You see, the problem was that these governments, just like any other, were flawed. They weren't perfect. They did what they did based on their own strategies and their own ambitions. But to justify everything that they were doing, the best way they found was to say that this is the way of the Prophet. This is the Sunnah of the Prophet. So they would commit horrible acts and then attribute the same acts to the Prophet to give the general public the impression that they were actually just following in his footsteps. But in reality, these governments had nothing to do with Rasulullah. And here what I'm trying to do is try to summarize the matter for you, because this conspiracy and the reasons behind it runs quite deep. But in short, the goal of these rulers and these governments who call themselves Islamic was for us to believe that the Prophet was just a human being, a normal human being, just like any of us. And the result of that is today we have books like the Satanic Verses, etc. So this actually raises another important question, which is that, so how can we trust what we read about the Prophet today? And this is also a very, very important question. And this is a question that will be addressed in our future videos. But for this video, we will try to explore that in spite of all of the fabrications about the Prophet, when we look hard, what do we find that what do we find one of his greatest enemies saying about the Prophet? Talking about him at a time where he doesn't have any other option but to tell the truth. And we will explore this through an incident about the letter that the Prophet wrote to the Roman emperor of his time. So, let's begin. So, first, some context before that. The Prophet actually wrote letters to the leaders of the biggest empires in the world in his time. In these letters, he explained to them that I'm a prophet of God, I've been sent by God, and he invited them to believe in him and called them towards divine guidance. So one of these letters, for example, was written to the Khusro, the Persian emperor, which was the biggest empire in Asia at the time. Another one of these letters went to Najashi, the Negus, the biggest leader in Africa. Another letter, for example, was written to the Muqawqis, who was the Coptic leader of Egypt at the time. Now, one of these letters was written to the then superpower of the world, the Roman Empire. So history tells us that Heraclius, the Roman emperor of that time, received the Prophet's letter in the year 628 AD. And he was in Homs, which is in modern day Syria, at the time when he received this letter. So when he received this, he asked his government officials to look for people in Homs who may have been traveling from Hijaz, which is where the Prophet was. And incidentally, Abu Sufyan, one of the greatest enemies of the Prophet at the time, was in Homs during that period. So him and his companions, who were basically there for trade, received a summons from the royal court. And what happens next is narrated by Abu Sufyan himself. So Abu Sufyan says that we were brought into the court and the Caesar, the emperor, was sitting there. He says we were asked to come forward, and he started speaking to us, the Caesar, through his translator. So Abu Sufyan says that we were asked, who among you is the closest to the one who calls himself the Prophet? And Abu Sufyan said, me, I'm the closest one to him. I'm from his tribe. So Abu Sufyan says that what Heraclius did was he brought Abu Sufyan forward and he stood him in front of himself. And then he took Abu Sufyan's companions and he made them stand behind Abu Sufyan. And then he explained. He said that I will ask you, Abu Sufyan, questions. And then he spoke to the rest of them and says, if he lies, give me an indication. So Abu Sufyan was standing in front all his companions behind him, and the Caesar was asking Abu Sufyan questions while looking at the people behind him. So he was caught. And then Abu Sufyan says, the translator started asking us the questions. So he said that Heraclius asked, "Tell me, what family status does this person who is claiming prophethood have among you?" So Abu Sufyan said that he is from Banu Hashim, which is considered a noble family among us. He then asked, "Has anyone in your area ever claimed something similar before?" Abu Sufyan says, "I said no." Right. Then he asked, "Was any among his ancestors a king?" I said no. Then he asked, "Do the nobles follow him, or do the poor people follow him?" So I said that the majority of the people who follow him are poor. Right. Are his followers increasing or decreasing? I said they seem to be increasing. Right. Does anybody who follow his religion become displeased and leave? I said no. Have you ever accused him of telling lies before this claim? He asked. And I said, no. He asked then, and does he break his truce? So Sufyan says that I said that we are in truce with him now, and I think he might break it, but no, he hasn't broken it yet. Right. He then asked, have you ever had a war with him? Yes, we had wars with him. Okay. What was the outcome? Well, sometimes we won and sometimes he won. Heraclius then asked, what does he order you to do? And I had to say that he tells us to worship the one God alone and not to worship anything along with him. He orders us to renounce all that our ancestors had said. He orders us to pray. He orders us to speak the truth. He orders us to be chaste. And he orders us to keep good relations with our kin. And after these questions were asked, there was a silence. And then Heraclius asked the translator to explain to us. He said, I asked you about his family, and you said that he is from a noble family. And in fact, all prophets of God are from noble families within their community. I asked you if anyone had claimed similar in his family before. And if you had said yes, I would have believed that he is lying and just following the other from his family. I then asked you if anyone of his family was a king. And if you had said yes, I would have known that he is just finding ways to take back his kingdom. I then asked you if he was ever accused of telling lies before this incident. And you said no. So I wondered, how does a person who has never lied at all lie about God? I asked you then whether rich people were following him or poor people. And you said poor. And so it is with all the prophets. It is the weak and the oppressed people who follow him. I then asked you if his followers were increasing or decreasing. And you said increasing. And that is the way with all true faiths until they are complete. And then I further asked you, was there anybody who was leaving his religion after following it? And you said no. And in fact, this is one of the signs of the true faith, that it does not leave after it enters the heart. I then asked you if he had ever betrayed a truce or a promise. And you said no, he had never done that. And that is the way the prophets are. And I asked you then to tell me what he orders you to do. And you said that he orders you to worship the one God and him alone, and forbade you from worshiping idols, and told you to pray, to speak the truth, to not commit fornication, and to take care of your kin. And if what you have told me today is true, then let me tell you that this person will soon occupy this place under my feet. And I knew from the scriptures that he was going to appear. But what I did not know was that he would be from you. And if I could reach him, I would go to him immediately to meet him. And if I was with him, I would wash his feet. And then Heraclius took the letter of the prophet and read it out loud. And it said, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. From Muhammad, the slave of Allah and his messenger, to Heraclius, the great one of Rome. Peace be upon the one who follows the right path. Thereafter, I invite you to Islam. And if you become a Muslim, you will be safe and receive security. And Allah will double your rewards for everything. But if you reject this invitation, you will be committing a sin by misguiding your people. And then there was a verse of Quran in the letter which said, O Prophet, say to them that, O people of the scripture, let us unite on the word which is unanimous between us. And it is that we do not worship anyone except the one God, and that none of us should take lords except him. But if they turn away, O Prophet, tell them and say to them that bear witness that we are the ones who submitted. And at this stage, Abu Sufyan says that there was a huge cry and commotion in the court. And during this commotion, we were pushed out of the court. And then Abu Sufyan says that when we came out, I said to my companions that the issue of him, he used a derogatory word for the Prophet, that his issue has become such that even the king of the Byzantines, the king of the fair ones, is afraid of him. And he says that at that moment, I recognized the revolution that had begun. And he says that very soon after that, I accepted Islam. So, that was a very short discussion on the Prophet over 3 videos, which talked about him, his character, and his personality. And as I said, I hope this gives you something to think about. But now that we have answered the who, we need to ask the why. So why was the Prophet sent to us? What was his mission? What was his purpose? What does he have to do with us so many years later? And this is what we will talk about in the next video.